1 month on, America pauses to remember its loss. Cockpit video of the latest strikes on Afghanistan. Defense chief warns action could last into next summer. And pressure mounts on Transport Secretary Stephen Byers.
From ITN, the ITV News with Trevor McDonald.
Good evening and welcome to this ITV News special. A month to the day since the attacks on America, President George W. Bush, his top officials and senior generals joined hundreds of Pentagon workers today to remember and to honor those who died. They listened to stirring military music and patriotic hymns, and they watched their president fighting back tears as he said, out of sorrow had come great resolve. In New York, they remembered too, at precisely the moment the World Trade Center was first hit. James Smates reports.
The last post sounds at the Pentagon 1 month to the day since this building and this country were shattered by history's most evil, most deadly terrorist attacks. For the servicemen and their families, the day was bittersweet. It is 1 month since the people they loved, the people they worked with, were so brutally killed, their names scrolling across a giant screen. And yet they are happy in the knowledge that this week other colleagues, thousands of miles away, have begun America's counterattack. The President held aloft the stars and stripes as so many of his countrymen do every day now, and at times looked close to tears. He spoke of the strength his country has found through tragedy.
On September 11th, great sorrow came to our country. And from that sorrow has come great resolve. Today we are a nation awakened to the evil of terrorism and determined to destroy it. The hijackers were instruments of evil who died in vain.
In vain, he said, because of the fate that will now befall their protectors in Afghanistan.
We gave that regime a choice: turn over the terrorists or face your ruin. They chose unwisely.
If the hijackers achieved anything on September the 11th, it was the near total unity of this country behind its president and its military. In New York City, at Ground Zero, the sound of the bagpipes brought work to a stop, the city's mayor leading them in a minute's silence at the very moment, 1 month ago, the first plane struck.
Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a year ago or more. The fire is still burning, but from it has emerged a stronger spirit, a more unified country, a more unified city, and a more unified world in the goal of making certain that something like this never happens again.
In 1 month, they have made great progress, but there remains a mountain of rubble where the Twin Towers once stood, and 4,800 people still missing beneath it. It has been a curious day of solemn memorial services interspersed with regular updates on the air campaign in Afghanistan. In their current mood, Americans wouldn't have it any other way. James Smates, ITN, Washington.
And American planes are dropping bombs in Afghanistan again tonight after a day of almost unchallenged daylight attacks on Kabul. On the ground, the anti-Taliban rebels of the Northern Alliance have told ITV News they want the Americans to bomb different targets. They want help in their battles around strategic positions like Bagram Airfield, from where our correspondent Julian Mannion reports.
Kabul has been bombarded many times in the last 20 years, but never quite like this. American firepower has devastated selected targets, with the airport taking repeated massive hits. The Taliban's tiny air force has been put out of action, and military headquarters and government buildings destroyed. But commanders of the opposition Northern Alliance, who've been massing their troops 20 miles north of Kabul in the hope of marching on the capital, are disappointed. General Babajan commands a vital section of the front at the ruined Bagram Air Base, where his men and the Taliban confront each other a few hundred yards apart. On a tour of Alliance positions, he told me that US and British airstrikes are hitting the wrong targets.
The Taliban haven't really suffered from these attacks. The Americans have hit airfields and air defense systems. They haven't inflicted huge losses on the Taliban.
General Babajan took me onto the deserted runway of the Bagram Air Base and pointed out the Taliban positions that he believes should be bombed to open the road to Kabul. The thousands of Taliban soldiers dug in at the other end of the Bagram runway in that village behind me over there are one of the most tempting military targets currently available. But it seems that for political reasons the United States and Britain will not bomb them immediately. And the likely result of that is that the operation against Osama bin Laden and the Taliban will take longer than originally hoped. The political reason that now appears to compel delay is that London and Washington do not want the Northern Alliance to take power in Kabul on their own. Instead, they want a broader-based government to replace the Taliban. And until it's formed, it's possible that Taliban troops blocking the road to Kabul will not be bombed. General Babajan may well have to wait before he marches on the Afghan capital. Julian Mannion, ITN, at Bagram, near Kabul.
Britain's top military officer, Admiral Sir Michael Boyce, said today the campaign against Osama bin Laden's terrorist network could last through the winter and into next summer at the very least. In the meantime, American experts have been analyzing how their air campaign has been progressing so far. Here's our defense correspondent, Kevin Dunn.
Tonight, the Pentagon released the first video evidence of one of its strikes, an attack it said was on a surface-to-air missile site. They also released photographs of a Taliban military airfield before a raid and after it was hit by multiple bombs. The Pentagon also confirmed they were now targeting Taliban troops.
Most of our targeting has been to their air defense, command and control, airfields, and certainly Taliban troops and their facilities will also be targets.
American aircraft are now attacking targets in Afghanistan around the clock. Today, the airport in Kabul and Taliban military units near the capital were struck. But it was emphasized at the Ministry of Defense that if necessary, this campaign will be a long haul.
It could be a very short haul if the Al-Qaeda is delatched from the Taliban, they give up Osama bin Laden, and we have a commitment within that country not to support terrorism. But we must expect at least to go through the winter and into next summer at the very least.
This was the night sky over Kabul tonight, as American bombs and missiles again struck the capital. Kevin Dunn, ITN.
Those then are the images of the latest attacks on Afghanistan. But where does the campaign go from here? Let's go now to Robert Moore in our briefing studio.
Trevor, as we enter a fifth night of airstrikes on Afghanistan, the focus of this military campaign may be about to shift significantly. So far, targets with the use of Pakistan's valuable airspace have included Taliban military installations, as well as remote training camps across Afghanistan. The Pentagon is now reporting key facilities destroyed around Kabul and other major towns. The question now is how to track down those held responsible for the attacks on America. For example, in Khost, there is a known network of tunnels built with CIA funds during the Soviet occupation. But even with low-flying aerial surveillance vehicles like the Predator, it seems only that human intelligence on the ground will succeed in locating bin Laden's exact position. He spent many years living in Kandahar, and he's known to have hideouts and caves around the city. But others suggest that bin Laden could have slipped across the remote mountains that lie between Afghanistan and Pakistan to outwit the Americans. If he has taken sanctuary inside caves or tunnels, and US intelligence can pinpoint him, the Americans might target him using these so-called bunker-busting missiles, such as the GBU-28. These use laser guidance to steer them into bunker openings. The force of impact buries them deep into concrete or rock before its 5,000-pound warhead is detonated. Another part of the US arsenal that might be deployed in the hunt for bin Laden are Black Hawk helicopters. They are fully capable of nighttime operations and could be used to deploy units of special forces. But helicopters are slow and in difficult mountainous terrain are vulnerable to the ground-to-air Stinger missiles which the Taliban forces are known to have. But far beyond the immediate military operation, diplomats are also having to address the much broader question of what sort of government would succeed the Taliban if the existing regime crumbles. There is a consensus emerging it would need to be a broad-based government, including Pashtuns, the same ethnic group as the Taliban's. It would also need a huge international effort to rebuild Afghanistan's infrastructure, shattered after more than 20 years of war. And to ensure longer-term peace, if there's no political deal between the tribes and the ethnic groups, it may even have to become a kind of UN protectorate, similar to East Timor and Kosovo. Trevor.
Our diplomatic editor, Robert Moore. Still ahead on this ITV News special, the Prime Minister tours Arab states to cement the coalition against terror. Anger in Pakistan, the growing protest against the airstrikes. And the Minister under pressure on two fronts tonight. Coming up after the break. Welcome back. The Prime Minister arrived home tonight from his diplomatic tour. It didn't all go to plan. He wanted to go to Saudi Arabia, but according to a Saudi government official, he was asked not to visit. In Egypt today, Mr. Blair said again, the war on terrorism was not a war on Islam. Our political editor, John Sargent, travelled with the Prime Minister.
Tony Blair's visit to Oman was brief but very friendly. He was seen off by their Deputy Prime Minister. It's in other parts of the Middle East where Britain's historic ties are weaker that Mr. Blair has to work hard to make an impression. As he was leaving Oman, it was announced that despite his wishes, he would not be going to Saudi Arabia. There were practical difficulties, according to the British side, anxious to play down speculation of Saudi reluctance. The Prime Minister's plane flew over Saudi Arabia on his way to Egypt. He checked details of a newspaper article in his name, which will appear in Arabic newspapers. In Cairo, the government have taken a strong line in condemning the attacks in America. They too have suffered from terrorist groups who back Osama bin Laden. Mr. Blair had a direct message for him and his supporters.
Our response has got to be to say to these people, you will not divide us at this time. We know the game that you are playing. We know how you are trying to use and usurp causes round the world to gain your own ends. We will stand united in our fight to see international terrorism defeated.
President Mubarak agreed with Mr. Blair on the importance of trying to reinvigorate the Middle East peace process. Trouble on the West Bank and widespread demonstrations in the Middle East against the military action in Afghanistan have increased fears that not enough is being done to make the case against Osama bin Laden. Mr. Blair is convinced of the urgent need to rally moderate Muslim opinion in the Arab world. It's become increasingly obvious that whatever the success of the military operation in Afghanistan, it's equally important to win the battle for public opinion. Tonight, Mr. Blair returned to Heathrow after his latest bout of whirlwind diplomacy. He's hoping to return soon to the Middle East, and he's confident that a trip can be arranged which would include Saudi Arabia. John Sargent, ITN, Heathrow.
The military strikes in Afghanistan are causing problems for many governments, and today saw the biggest anti-American demonstrations in Pakistani towns and cities. The government says it will clamp down hard tomorrow to stop Friday prayers, creating widespread unrest. From Pakistan, Bill Neely reports.
These men are the Taliban's only voice in the world, and today their voice was strident, claiming dozens of civilians are dying in the bombing.
The Pentagon is lying to the world that it is not targeting civilians.
As they spoke, they got news from Afghanistan suggesting 100 civilians had just been killed in a village. We have no way of verifying this. Then, the threat.
When the American enters Afghanistan, there will start the real war.
The Taliban aren't alone. Tens of thousands rallied in support of them today in northern Pakistan. It's from crowds like this that the Taliban's ranks will swell. From crowds like this that Pakistan is facing trouble for its support of the bombing.
If they keep bombing Afghanistan and if innocent civilians are killed, there's going to be a very strong reaction in Pakistan. That reaction is already developing.
It is. Explosives for 3,000 grenades were found near the Afghan border today.
We have been put in a very difficult spot. And our friends, if at all they call themselves our friends, they are once again taking us up along a path which could be disastrous for us, which is like committing a suicide, a collective national suicide.
The arrival of American troops and a dozen US planes in Pakistan today brought protests from students and real unease here. The Zaidi family supports the bombing, but not of civilians and not in a long war.
No sane person is going to be happy listening to all this. Why should it last till spring?
Having an army here, for a short while, it doesn't bother me at all.
How about a long while?
Long war is a tragedy for everybody.
So Pakistan is trapped tonight, not in the short war it hoped for, but in a war that's likely to be long, divisive and explosive. It faces its next test tomorrow with a day of nationwide protests. Bill Neely, ITN, Islamabad.
Other news, pressure is mounting tonight on the Transport Secretary Stephen Byers and on his spin doctor Joe Moore. After her gaffe on the day the World Trade Center was hit, she's now accused of planting unfavorable stories about the head of Transport for London. Stephen Byers is being accused of supporting her and of mishandling the winding up of Railtrack. Here's Joe Andrews.
The row over Stephen Byers' special advisor Joe Moore is now raising questions about the Secretary of State himself. So far, Mr. Byers hasn't explained his decision to keep Ms. Moore, who wrote an email suggesting the government should use the Twin Towers attack to bury unfavourable news items. The Transport Secretary hasn't been seen in public for 3 days since this Cabinet meeting on Monday, and is now also coming under serious pressure over Railtrack.
I think it is time that he now came and explained himself and explained the background to these assertions and allegations which have been made, because they are disturbing. And as I say, what is important at the moment is that we have confidence that the government is operating in good faith right across the board.
New allegations concern a civil servant at the Transport Department who is said to have been moved from his job after refusing Miss Moore's request to plant unfavourable newspaper stories about the London Transport Commissioner Bob Kiley.
This is a department that's struggling with the rail track problems, struggling with air traffic control, struggling with the tube, and to be engaging in activities like this, I mean, it's silly. This is schoolyard antics.
None of this comes at a good time for Mr. Byers, wrestling with Railtrack over the decision to put the company effectively into liquidation. Railtrack have now accused him of trying to mug the company and are seeking an urgent meeting with him. Downing Street have said repeatedly today that Joe Moore had a legitimate right to point out policy differences between Mr. Kiley and the government. But they also say that the decision to keep her was one for Stephen Byers and not the Prime Minister. Joe Andrews, ITN, Westminster.
The chairman of the inquiry into the death of Victoria Clombier has ordered another investigation into child treatment at Brent Council in London. Lord Laming was reacting to evidence from the social services manager who said unaccompanied children had been put into bed and breakfast accommodation. Brent Council denied the allegations. Tonight's main headline again, President Bush has led a memorial service at the Pentagon to the victims of the terrorist attacks there and in New York a month ago today. And we end tonight with a memorial service here by firefighters from around the country. They gathered at St. Paul's Cathedral in London to remember their colleagues who died in New York. Nearly 350 of them never returned after rushing to the World Trade Center to try to save those trying to get out. Andrea Catherwood was at the service.
3,000 fire officers from across Britain filed into St. Paul's Cathedral today to the strains of the Fire Brigade Band. Here to mourn and to honour their New York colleagues who were killed as they tried to save others exactly 1 month ago.
I think a firefighter is a firefighter throughout the world. They have a great affinity
a great respect for each other. It's like being part of a big family.
Inside, that show of solidarity was echoed as the Union flag and stars and stripes were carried by colour parties from the London Fire Brigade and the US Air Force, as the Canon of St Paul's spoke of moral and spiritual outrage.
Chaplain, firefighters, victims of a malevolent evil that threatens the whole world.
Hundreds more firefighters joined in outside, for each the words of the fireman's prayer more poignant than ever.
I want to feel my calling and to give the best in me, to guard my every neighbour and protect his property. And if according to your will, I have to give my life, please bless with your protecting hand my children and my wife.
Today they wished that sombre blessing on 342 families of their New York colleagues. And as the flags came down, a commitment that in the face of evil, firefighters everywhere will not flinch, will not flee, will not fail. This is the first time fire officers from every fire brigade in the United Kingdom have come together for a church service. Fire chiefs believed it was the most appropriate way to honour their colleagues in the New York Fire Department who tried to rescue those trapped inside the Twin Towers and paid the ultimate price for their bravery. Andrea Catherwood, ITN, at St Paul's Cathedral.
And that's the ITV News for now. But I'll be back after Without Motive for the Tonight programme and this. The Age of Anxiety. An exclusive opinion poll reveals what Britain really thinks about the war on terror.
It's very scary at the moment.
Days afterwards, we were looking out the window. When a flight goes by, you tend to get nervous.
Plus, David Baddiel on David Beckham.
From this seat, I saw one of the most important goals in English footballing history. And now, I've found out what makes golden balls tick.
That's the Tonight programme, including the latest news headlines in an hour. Viewers in Scotland can see it a little later. For now, though, goodbye.
Powergen. Gas, electricity and telephone.
Good evening. Well, the good news is a warm weekend ahead of us. Still got some rain going to be lingering on, though. Obviously just going to take the edge off those temperatures. So for tomorrow, we've still got cloudy, patchy light rain for the northwest parts of England, and for Wales, showers lingering on for Scotland. Plenty of sunshine, however, lingering across the southern half of Britain. Temperatures shouldn't really cause too much of a stir for this time of year. St Helier coming in at 18, Perth 15, that's 59 in Fahrenheit. Still going to feel quite breezy, though, across the north half of the country, but the good news is for the south, those winds will have just slightly eased back. If you do need any more information, you can always check out the website. The address, as always, is at the bottom of the screen. Here's the weather summary.
Powergen. Gas, electricity and telephone.
Turkey! What? It's Turkey.
They've found out where they're going. The race begins now. But with only $200 in their pockets.
But no money.
We're going to make this. Who will get to Istanbul first?
How did I get in that car?
She uses her feminine charm.
I'm on that car. If I have some heels, I'll put them on as well.
Next up, Istanbul. The race sets off tonight at 10, ITV2. If you have any of these services, you can get ITV2 for free now.